Hi, Jimmy. This is Bill Clinton calling your secret hotline here. I got to keep it down because I'm calling from the doghouse here in Chappaqua, New York, at our place. Don't even ask. All you need to know is she's on the warpath again. Oh, boy. Hillary yelled at me for listening to you. I have to do it in secret. But I really admire your show. I really do. I'm calling to wish you the best. All the best. In the future and even right now. Oh, here she comes. Listen, I got to go, but you got a great show, and you're going to do very well in the future, I'll tell you that much. Oh, my God, I know it's going to happen. She's going to have me read chapters of her book again. Put us both to sleep. I know what the title of her darn book should have been. Should have been called How I Dropped the Ball on the 2-Yard Line with 3 seconds left in the Super Bowl. I got to go.
Well, thanks for the call, President Clinton. I really do appreciate it. Hello, my friends. Welcome. It's Jimmy at the Crossroads, and on today's episode, we will be joined by syndicated columnist and podcast host Ruben Navarrette to answer the provocative question he put in a column recently, do brown lives matter too? Plus, with the crisis at the southern border and Kamala Harris, the vice president, being tapped to oversee it, how is she doing? What are we to make of the Biden administration's approach to immigration? We'll talk about that with Ruben. Plus, the Crossroads panel with Rick Newman of Yahoo Finance and Chris Edwards of the Cato Institute will tackle the question, Biden's economic plan, especially his tax increases, just how bad are they really? We'll talk about it with our Crossroads panel. That and so much more coming up on today's edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. We're getting started right now.
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
And now, ladies and gentlemen, your host, Jimmy Sengenberger.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to another edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. So great to be with you today, again with syndicated columnist Ruben Navarrette joining us today, plus Yahoo Finance senior columnist Rick Newman and Chris Edwards of the Cato Institute. It is such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you today, as it is always. And if you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel, please do so. We appreciate your support, liking our content, sharing our content as well. In just a moment, are we all queued up? Just a moment, we will go to our interview recorded a little bit ago with Ruben Navarrette, again, syndicated columnist here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, where we pose this question to him that he actually poses, a pretty provocative question, that he proposes in a recent column just from a few days ago. Do brown lives matter too? That's a very interesting question and something that Ruben certainly can talk about here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. By the way, we are doing regular Monday live streams, and next week I am so excited to announce that we are planning to have on the show both Jack Phillips, the owner of Masterpiece Cake Shop, you know, that cake shop that has been under attack for its religious liberties, for trying to exercise its religious freedom in Colorado. We're going to talk with owner Jack Phillips next week, as well as Judge Ken Starr, who has a new book out entitled Religious Liberty in Crisis. Do not miss that next week. Nathan Matoush is our producer extraordinaire, always working the Matoush magic here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Want to say hey to Nathan. You're just so modest to give yourself some applause, Nathan. My goodness.
You know what, Jimmy? I'm surprised I gave myself an applause more than I gave you before.
You know, I am upset that you didn't give me applause today.
The applause is coming, my friend.
I look forward to it.
It's
Good.
coming.
It should be coming. How you doing, brother?
I'm good. It's so great to be back on Jimmy at the Crossroads, getting the band back together, seeing some of these guests. Ruben Navarrette. And I was just saying earlier, we probably had him on the show about this time last year.
That's true. That's true. He was one of our very first guests here on this very show a year ago when we were getting things going.
That's right.
And also, Rick Newman's going to be joining us from Yahoo Finance. He's a past guest that we've had on. And he and Chris Edwards of the Cato Institute are going to have a very interesting discussion about what's going on with Biden's tax plan, which, let me tell you, Nathan, it's not good.
Yeah, it's a mess. I'm looking forward to it. It's always a beautiful mess here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. But I'm really liking these panel discussions. That one last week with Michael Hiltzik, with
Nan Hayworth and Hannah Cox.
Yeah,
that
was great.
That's
good
for
stuff.
Sure. Well, Matoush, we've got so much coming up. I appreciate you being along for the ride, my friend.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Once again, Matoush Magic working that Matoush Magic as producer extraordinaire. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Ruben Navarrette, host of the podcast Ruben in the Center, dives into a few topics, including what's going on with the aftermath of the Derek Chauvin trial and at the southern border with Kamala Harris, the vice president, at the helm of the border crisis. Let's get rolling.
We interrupt this program for a very important presidential message.
I have an issue that's very important right now to the American people and to the people of the United States as well. Our jobs are disappearing to Mexico. These jobs are gone. Even the Keebler Cookie Company is no longer, it's in Mexico, folks. It's down in Mexico so far. And those elves are out of a job. Our elves are out of, they don't even speak Spanish. They can't go down there, and they have Mexican elves down there now who don't even understand English making these cookies. I'm going to read the new ingredients just so you're interested. Honey, check. Wheat, check. Oats, check. Sugar, of course. But here's where it gets strange. Chicharrones. What's chicharrones? Jalapeno peppers, folks. If you try these cookies, you're going to burn your tongue off. It'll be gone. You'll have nothing. You won't be able to speak Spanish or English or any other language. Well, I'm going to bring those elves back so quick and so much. They're going to love it. You're going to have your cookies back, and your tongue's going to be fine, believe me.
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner, and it is time now for the Crossroads interview. And for it, I am so pleased to welcome back to the show to talk about, do brown lives matter? To talk about Kamala Harris, vice president, and the southern border. To talk about whether or not Joe Biden's going to allow the number of refugees he had promised into this country. Let's dive into these topics and more with syndicated columnist Ruben Navarrette, who is now the host of a brand new podcast available on all your podcast apps, Ruben in the Center. Ruben, my friend, welcome back.
Great to be back with you, Jimmy. Thanks.
Great to have you here. So I want to jump right in because you asked a provocative question in a very recent column. You asked the question, and this is in the context of the death of Adam Toledo, who was shot and killed in Chicago by a police officer. You asked the question, do brown lives matter? And I was very struck by this because recently I was listening to my friend Rashini Rajkumar, who's a radio host in Minneapolis, and she is Sri Lankan, I believe, and she was talking about what was going on with the Derek Chauvin verdict because she's right there in Minneapolis, and she said she felt caught in the middle between black and white being brown, and that came to mind as I was reading your piece. Tell us your thoughts.
Right. So another group that this falls into that middle ground, neither black nor white, are Asian Americans. You know, the new census numbers are going to come out. They're going to put Asian Americans at almost 10% of the population overall. And yet you saw after the Atlanta killings that America struggles with this paradigm of black and white, and it finds it very difficult when someone comes along as a victimized group that is neither black nor white. and Asian Americans experience that, and Latinos experience that. The same census is going to show that 20% of the country is Latino, and yet in this moment, at this moment, Hispanics are sort of lost and invisible because, again, the country, the media, the politics is all defined as black and white. So my answer to my own question is that no, brown lives don't matter, because you have cases of police brutality, of people dying at the hands of police going back in cities like Albuquerque and Las Vegas and Phoenix and Los Angeles for generations, and they've never gotten this kind of attention. So I think one thing in the media that we don't do very well is complexity. We like things simple, Jimmy. And I think that a paradigm that goes beyond black and white, whether you're talking about people from Sri Lanka or people who are Asian American or people who are Latino, it just doesn't fit into that paradigm.
Now, Ruben Navarrete, when you look at the dynamics of the Black Lives Matter movement, that's explicitly focusing on the idea that the black community has a particular grievance and needs to be addressed directly. So isn't it sort of exclusive by nature in terms of where they're trying to put the focus? And what do you make of that emphasis, especially over the past year?
So to take your question, I don't really think that the emphasis is so much about atoning for slavery, for instance. You know, I would say that Latinos experienced obviously a form of Jim Crow in the Southwest during the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. You know, restaurants that said no dogs or Mexicans allowed. It all depends on where you're telling the story from. If you're telling it from New York or DC, you might not know that history, but it's kind of hard to miss out in the Southwest. But having said that, this is really about a very legitimate claim by African Americans that they seem to be singled out and picked on by police officers in this country. Now, obviously, in the vast majority of cases, the interactions with police do not result in any sort of harm to African Americans. But there have been significant numbers of African American, particularly African American men, who perhaps because they seem threatening to police or because police are judging them unfairly, do end up in the headlines in the most awful way. So that is a very legitimate point. I'm not saying we shouldn't focus on Black lives. We should focus on all lives, though, and we should be attuned to this idea that somehow, in the case of Adam Toledo, here you have a 13-year-old Mexican American boy who's shot by a Chicago police officer after he does what he's told, which is stop and put your hands up. And so you would think that would get more press, but it really hasn't. You know, I consume a lot of media, and the media is much more comfortable reverting back to what it knows, which is black and white.
How do you think, if at all, the immigration dynamic comes into play in what you're talking about, Ruben Navarrete?
Well, I think in some cases, there are people who think that the number that I throw out, 60 million Latinos in the country, 20% of the country, they say, oh, well, that's just a bunch of illegal immigrants. No, those people tend not to participate in census surveys. Those are the people who answer the door at the, you know, when there's a knock at the door, okay? Those are the people who participate in the census. The actual number of Hispanics in this country is probably much bigger. So I think there is a tendency sometimes to think that because illegal immigrants are by their very nature marginalized, that somehow many Hispanics are going to be marginalized. That's not the case. There are Mexican Americans who've lived in Colorado and Arizona and New Mexico, you know, for hundreds of years in many cases. And so that is an important point that needs to be made. I just think a lot of it, Jimmy, goes back to geography. Your worldview is impacted by the fact that you live in Denver, Colorado. My worldview is I'm in San Diego. But if you and I did what we did in Washington or New York, we'd be stuck in that same black and white bubble.
Yeah, there is something so interesting about being outside of the Beltway and outside of New York City or outside of some of these centers where they're talking about these things in a very specific and narrow sort of way. And here you and I are in Denver, Colorado, and San Diego, California, with a different perspective, especially because you've lived in a few different places out west, Ruben Navarrete. Now, with that in mind, I want to ask you about the Derek Chauvin verdict. Of course, he was found guilty on all three counts against him. What did you make of that verdict, and also the reaction to it from people on different sides of the political spectrum?
Yeah, so I'm not just the grandson of a Mexican immigrant who came to the country legally during the Mexican Revolution. I'm also the son of a cop. My dad was on the job for 37 years, grew up around cops, and nothing hurts a good cop like a bad cop. I think most cops, if they're honest, will tell you that Derek Chauvin got what he deserved, that there's no excuse for keeping your knee on a man's neck after he's passed out, when his hands are, you know, handcuffed behind him. It's not just to say the optics were bad. You know, there are many things that Derek Chauvin did wrong, and he was held accountable for this. That's not the issue. What bothers me about this verdict is that it's become sort of a win-loss issue for African Americans. They have clearly lost so much in the context of the criminal justice system. Police, prosecutors, and judges who have for generations treated African Americans unfairly, convicted them when they were innocent, not convicted the people who assaulted or killed them when they were guilty. And so those are all losses. And now I think there's a tendency among African Americans to chalk this up as a win. You know, the Derek Chauvin victory is a win. I literally heard last week, Jimmy, an African American woman tell a reporter at NPR that the verdict made her proud to be Black. Okay? It took me a while to figure that out. I'm still wrapping my head around it. How does a verdict in a criminal trial make you proud to be Black? And it's because many are treating this as a victory. That's not how you should view a matter of criminal justice.
That's a point that I think is so important. What is criminal justice? Because we also heard Keith Ellison, who is the Attorney General for Minnesota, say that this isn't justice. Justice doesn't come until we have, I think it was restoration was the word that he used, amplifying this idea of justice to be more than a case-by-case basis, which is how I've always understood primarily justice to be, certainly from our legal system standpoint here in the United States, Ruben Navarrette.
Yeah, it extends to what they call social justice, this idea that it's intangible. You can't really define when it's ever going to end. I think that Ellison was right to call it accountability. You know, I'm all about accountability. You know, on the days that they say, hey, Ruben, you're a Republican, on the days that Latinos call me a Republican or dismiss me as a Republican, it's because I believe in accountability. I don't believe in making excuses. When you do something wrong, you get punished, okay? And whether you be a young Latino kid who does something wrong and he gets punished, or in this case, a middle-aged white cop, you get punished too. So I'm all pro accountability. And I think that's why this was a just verdict.
So justice achieved in that regard.
In one regard, yeah. They're talking about a more social justice, sweeping justice. Right. Where do you start with that? I mean, we're never going to be able to make up for the injustice of the past, right? So I understand Ellison's point in the overall, but with this particular case and this trial, this is a lot better outcome than had he been exonerated on all charges.
We could certainly also go over the verdict and your stance on that, but I want to jump in, since we only have a little bit longer with you, syndicated columnist Ruben Navarrette, again, host of the new podcast, Ruben in the Center. I want to talk about immigration and especially Kamala Harris, the vice president who's been tapped by President Biden as he was tapped under former President Barack Obama to really oversee the immigration effort, what's happening at the border, be more hands-on in that regard. She was on CNN yesterday, in fact, to in part talk about her leadership position or whatever that is on the border. I didn't really gain much from that interview. That's why I don't really want to play any clip. We got some B-roll, but I don't think there's any really standout clip. What do you make of where Kamala Harris is at the border right? Oh, wait, she's not at the border.
She's not at the border. You know, in the Derek Chauvin verdict, when it came down, Kamala Harris was front and center. She cares about criminal justice. She cares about social justice. She cares about African Americans. She doesn't care about immigration, and she doesn't really care about Latinos. I speak now as a Californian who once had her as my senator. Even when she was in the Senate, a border state for California, she never cared about immigration, never proposed any legislation on immigration. It's not her thing. It's not her issue. She doesn't care, not interested. And so then when Joe Biden basically appointed her in this thankless position of being not his border czar, I won't say that. He put her in charge of the overall crisis. It's very difficult to deal with the migration crisis if you don't visit the border. And here we are, where Kamala Harris has stubbornly refused to go to the border. Instead, the spin out of the White House is, well, she's going to go over the border. She's going to go to Guatemala. She's going to go to Mexico. The root causes, etc. She can walk and chew gum at the same time. The reason, Jimmy, she doesn't want to go to the border is very simple. She doesn't want to be caught in a photo op standing in front of kids in cages, kids in these glass cylinders, these large aquariums without water, and have that come back to haunt her. She also doesn't want to be having to deal with questions that are impossible to answer, like, what's your solution to this crisis? So of course she's going to see the border from 50,000 feet, and the media is going along with it, and they're giving her a pass on it, but they ought not. She's been a failure on the border. Joe Biden is failing on the border. His new polling shows that 2/3 of Americans think he's terrible on the border. 3/4 of Americans actually think he's terrible on the border, and only 1/4 of Americans think he's doing okay on the border. So he's failing immigration, and Kamala Harris is part of that failure.
Well, and Ruben, and I know you're not a solutions guy in the sense that you say journalists shouldn't be offering solutions, but Kamala Harris as vice president or Joe Biden as president should be offering solutions. So what do you look for them to present? What are you looking from them, from them, in order to give you a sense that, you know what, they might actually be finally getting this situation?
Yeah, I'll give you one quick answer to that question. The reason I think journalists, and I really feel strongly about this, journalists should not be dragged into the solution game, because if you become like a certain columnist at the New York Times, an expert on climate change, and you have your own proposal on climate change, it's going to be very difficult for you to have an open mind when the time comes to assess somebody else's competing position, because you've got a dog in that race. Journalists ought not have a dog in that race. And that's the main best argument for not having solutions. It's not that we don't have ideas and we know what we think the solutions should be, but it's very, very hard to be objective if you're on one side or the other. In terms of one positive solution, Jimmy, I'll give you this. George W. Bush, to his credit, probably the most pro-immigration president we've ever had in this country, has been making the rounds talking about immigration and a new book he has out on immigrants. And he was asked this question, and he said, look, what you need to do is get more immigration judges down to the border. There are a whole bunch of immigration judges. You need to appoint more of them, get them down to the border so they can adjudicate these cases in real time, and you can decide who gets to stay and who gets to go. That's it, man. That's the best answer I've heard. It's on my list as well. It was my answer as well. Listen to Bush.
Very interesting. Ruben Navarrette, final question for you. You're also critical of President Biden and his flip maybe on refugees that he would allow into this country. What's going on there from your standpoint?
It's crazy, right? So Donald Trump in his last year of the pandemic, he put a cap of 15,000 refugees. Joe Biden did what Joe Biden does and what Democrats do. They go and promise to Latinos and others the moon and the stars. He says, you elect me, I'm going to raise that pathetically low 15,000 per year allotment for refugees up to 125,000 or more. But when he gets in office, 100 days into office, he says, you know what, I kind of like that Trump number. I think we're going to keep it there. Then AOC and others fall back and attack him for that and say, oh, not only are you flip-flopping, but are you taking your cues from Donald Trump on immigration and refugees? Then he flip-flops again and says, okay, tell you what, in May, I'll come back with some numbers, and I promise they'll be much higher. So this was an example, Jimmy, of how difficult it is for Joe Biden to hold together a fractured Democrat coalition that has different views on immigration. A white Rust Belt Democrat in Ohio sees this issue differently than AOC does in New York. And he's trying to piece it all together, Joe Biden is, and it's very difficult. And on the refugee issue and the cap issue, it exploded in his face.
30 seconds, Ruben Navarrette. I know we got to let you go. Ruben in the Center, your new podcast available on all podcast apps. My friend, what can people expect from the new show?
Yeah, you know, it's beyond blue and red. It's not blue and red. It's not even strictly purple. It's just taking a look critically at all these issues and looking for the third way. You know, we can't be forced and bullied into thinking the answer is on the hard right or the hard left. It's not. Oftentimes, it's in the middle of the road, what I call the sensible center. That's where I am, and that's why the podcast is Ruben in the Center.
Ruben Navarrette, everybody. Again, syndicated columnist. Check out his podcast, available on all the apps now. Ruben in the Center. Thanks so much for joining us, my friend.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Once again, syndicated columnist Ruben Navarrette, host of the podcast Ruben in the Center, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. I just wanted to get Ruben's unique viewpoint on some of the issues of the day, see where he's at, get his pulse a little bit. He's always got some very interesting thoughts to share on a variety of topics. And on immigration, he is critical of both the left and the right, I think with good reason in a lot of areas, but make no mistake about it. We have a crisis at the southern border when it comes to the massive influx of illegal immigrants, including unaccompanied minors. And that's especially, make no mistake, it's especially because they know that Joe Biden has said, basically inviting them to the country to come to the United States. He's basically invited illegal immigrant flows into the United States from his rhetoric and his unwillingness to seriously address the crisis at the border. And then he flips, I think, on the number of refugees he wants to allow into the country. And then there's no consistency there. If you don't have consistency, what do you have? And then he appoints Vice President Kamala Harris to be the point person on the border crisis. And as Ruben said, being a California resident himself, Kamala Harris has never really cared about immigration. She's never really paid attention to this issue or taken it seriously. She doesn't know what to do there and is not addressing it in a very cogent and coherent way. And that's what we need when you have a crisis like the one we have at the southern border with such a massive magnitude. We'll continue to keep tabs on this from various angles when it comes to the crisis at the southern border. But we need to run to a break. When we come back here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, we're going to have our Crossroads panel to dive in to something else Biden's got going on, which is his economic plan, which includes proposals for massive tax increases. What in the world is he proposing there, and how are we to make heads or tails of that, his infrastructure plan, and more? That's our Crossroads panel coming up in a matter of moments here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Concerned about that trade deficit? Looking for that magic solution? I'm Bill of Goods for ScamWow, the tariff towel. It's like a tax. It's like a fee. It's like a penalty. This tariff really sucks up the trade deficit. And the jobs we'll save are tremendous. This is for the House, the Senate, the POTUS. You'll be saying crap every time you use the ScamWow tariff towel. Look at this. It just does the work. Why wouldn't you want to pay twice the price for that washing machine? How much would you pay for this tariff? It'll make this microwave seem like it's brand new. And at only twice the price. Look at the way the tariff towel cleans your clock. Wow, look at that. So clean, you can see the future. You can see future tariffs coming from a mile away. Look at the way it polishes these stars. Boy, if that don't make you feel patriotic, huh?
I love paying extra. I don't even worry about it anymore, since the trade deficit will go down.
Look at this tariff. I love this tariff. It's like a security blanket.
All I can say is, scam, wow!
ScamWow compels other nations to use their own tariff towels on our stuff, making our goods more expensive overseas. Whoopee.
The micro tariff is for everything, for lumber, for steel, even solar panels. It'll melt that trade deficit down. I don't know. It sells itself, America. The ScamWow sells for 25%. But if you call in the next 20 minutes, because we can't do this all term, we'll give you the second tariff absolutely free. That's 4 tariffs for 25%. And it comes with a 5-year warranty. Here's how to order.
Call 1-800-RIP-YOU-OFF. ScamWow is not available in capitalism and is made in Washington. Beware of ScamWow grift. 1-800-RIP-YOU-OFF. Call now.
Ladies and gentlemen, your attention please. It's now time for the Crossroads panel, featuring special guests Chris Edwards, Rick Newman, and of course your host, Mr. Sang Style, Jimmy Sengenberger.
Yes, indeed. Welcome back. Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Nathan, I was wondering where that applause was going to be, brother. Thank you so much. Nathan Matoush, producer extraordinaire, working the Matoush magic once again here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you have not done so already. Folks, Joe Biden, our President of the United States, has an economic plan. He's going to be speaking, by the way, in his first address to Congress and the nation simultaneously this Wednesday night, in which he will certainly talk about his economic plan. And by way of introduction for our guests, I will want in a moment to play a clip that will take us down memory lane to 2019 during the campaign and what President Biden, then candidate Biden, said about taxes and what he would like to do, especially on the capital gains tax, as well as something Jen Psaki said as the press secretary, I think just yesterday about his proposals, or just last week about his proposals. But first, let me introduce our guests here on Jimmy at the Crossroads for today's Crossroads panel. In the center, Rick Newman. He is senior columnist at Yahoo Finance, where he also hosts programs on their web shows. And we've got Chris Edwards. He is Director of Tax Policy Studies at the Cato Institute and also heads up downsizinggovernment.org. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. It's so good to have you.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
There we go. So we give applause to the guests as well. We do appreciate it. Rick Newman giving applause, I'm sure, to Chris Edwards and Chris as well in good faith here. All of us having a good time on Jimmy at the Crossroads. We will, that's for sure. All right, gentlemen, I want to dive right in by playing cut 4. This is President Biden, then candidate Biden, on the campaign trail during a debate, pitching his idea of a tax increase, and then Jen Psaki, the press secretary, talking about that just last week.
We need to go out and make it clear to the American people that we are going to raise taxes on the wealthy. We're going to reduce tax burdens on those who are not. We have to start rewarding work, not just wealth. I can pay for my whole health care plan by changing the way in which we deal with capital gains. People should pay their capital gains based on what their income tax is, and not at 20%.
Well, the president's proposal for the American Jobs Plan was about modernizing and making a historic investment in our infrastructure. The tax component was about how to pay for it. We're very open to a range of options, and he has some lines in the sand we've talked about, including not having the American people pay for it, or it not being on the backs of the American people. It relates to the capital gains rates and the top margins that you've seen reported out there, the president's bottom line is that people making under $400,000 a year will not have their taxes go up. So if you look at these proposed numbers, which are consistent with what he talked about on the campaign trail when he was running for president, what I can say is that it will only affect people making more than $1 million a year. That's 0.3% of taxpayers, or 3 out of every 1,000 taxpayers. That's even as the top 1% saw their net worth rise by $4 trillion in the middle of a historic pandemic. So he has some bottom lines of where he will not budge fast, right, on individual numbers and who will be impacted, but he's also open to discussion.
Let's dive right in. Rick Newman, it sounds like President Biden is following through on something that he promised during the campaign. What does his plan entail, and what's your overall take on it?
Yeah, there's no surprise to any of this, although the market seems to have been caught by surprise, at least for a day or two. But Biden said he was going to raise taxes to pay for a lot of building plans, social welfare plans, and other things. And now he's rolling out the blueprints for those. And of course, Congress makes the legislation. So the pattern we're seeing is Biden publishes the plan. He's done that with the so-called American Jobs Plan. That's going to be the big infrastructure plan with some climate programs in there. And then that's going to be followed apparently very soon, perhaps this week, by what he calls the American Family Plan, more like social welfare spending. And he's coming up with, tax hikes to pay for this. And it's exactly what he said he was going to do when he campaigned. I have not noticed any single thing Biden has said as president that he did not say he was going to do as a candidate in terms of raising taxes. He's not going to get all these tax hikes he's talking about. They're not going to come in. Congress is not going to pass them at the level he's asking. I think it's safe to say Biden knows that. But he's making his ask. He's fulfilling his campaign pledges, and he's probably going to get about half of what he's asking for from Congress in terms of actual tax hikes.
Chris Edwards, with some of that in mind, I mean, clearly President Biden talked about these things on the campaign trail. In fact, back in October, you wrote a blog post and a commentary article saying why the capital gains tax he was proposing, which now the administration is formally talking about, was a bad idea. Your thoughts to kick things off?
Yeah, I think I agree with Rick that Biden did promise this stuff he's now following through on. However, there are giant contradictions here. So his $2 trillion infrastructure plan would be funded by roughly a $2 trillion corporate tax increase. But much of his infrastructure would be vast subsidies to the private sector, such as broadband, electric vehicle companies, manufacturing companies. So he'd be raising corporate taxes, which would reduce the incentive for private companies to invest at the same time as he'd be giving these corporations these subsidies. So, for example, America's broadband companies like AT invest over $50 billion a year in internet infrastructure and broadband. Well, that's great. And Biden would give them more. He would give them $100 billion more subsidies for broadband. But at the same time, he'd raise corporate taxes so that AT&T has to pay a lot more corporate tax, which would reduce their incentive to invest. It's the same with electric vehicles. You know, GM is promising to spend $27 billion on electric vehicles in coming years. Well, that's great. But then Biden would raise the corporate tax on General Motors, and that would reduce their incentive to invest. So there's this giant contradiction in the Democratic plan. And another related contradiction is that, you know, the Democrats and Biden himself campaigned against corporate subsidies. They claim that Republicans hand out corporate subsidies, and frankly, they do often. But you know, many leading Democrats, Bernie Sanders and Biden himself, say they're against corporate subsidies or corporate welfare. But the infrastructure plan itself is a massive corporate subsidy plan. So I think the Democratic Party's got to really figure out what it's for here.
That's interesting. Rick Newman, what do you make of the infrastructure side of the equation? We'll get to taxes in a moment, but in terms of infrastructure, this idea of providing the projects in a way that Chris is laying out.
The way I think about this is, even though it might not be labeled this way, we're having a big debate about whether we should adopt industrial policy in the United States. You know, I have capitalist leanings and free market leanings. You should, you know, the free market should sort this out. However, China has industrial policy, and they are using industrial policy to, for example, to subsidize vehicle electrification, and they're leading in vehicle electrification. Europe clearly has different types of industrial policy. And I'm not saying that is the best solution for the United States, but I think Biden is actually right when he outlines the technologies of the future and the industries of the future, where we want the United States. It is in the U.S. national interest that the United States has the lead, has the companies, has the factories, and has the workers. And I think we have enough evidence from globalization during the last 25 years that if you just leave it up to the corporate sector is fantastic at efficiency, but efficiency often means we don't make it here. I mean, we saw this in spades with protective medical equipment during the coronavirus pandemic. So I don't see a neat outcome here, but I think there is some merit to discussing whether we really do need to have more of a deliberate industrial policy in the United States.
Chris Edwards, Director of Tax Policy Studies at the Cato Institute. What do you make of Rick Newman's point about the idea that maybe what Biden's doing will just help us make us more competitive against a country, say, like China?
I think what Biden is proposing would actually make us less competitive. I agree with Rick. I'm concerned that, that America lead in these industries of the future, but I think what Biden is proposing would do the opposite. So, for example, the U.S. corporate tax rate, if you add state taxes on now, we're at around 27%. Well, that's already higher than China with a 25% corporate tax. And the average rate in Europe is only around 20%. So, when you get car companies thinking about where they want to locate their next factory, whether it's a traditional car factory, a new EV factory, we want them to locate that new factory here in America. And the way you do that is have a very inviting and competitive low corporate tax rate. And, another thing that Biden is proposing is he wants to tie labor union regulations to all his flows of federal money. He's saying he wants labor unions involved in all his new infrastructure, his EV activities, his manufacturing subsidy activities. I think that'll raise costs for American producers and, again, induce American producers to move their production offshore. So I think the way to get production here in America, to get the industries of the future, whether it's EVs, whether it's solar panels, whether it's windmills, is to have a very inviting business climate and induce the American businesses and foreign businesses to invest here because it's the best and most efficient place for them to set up factories.
And what Chris is saying is rational and sensible.
Go ahead.
The question I would have, though, is So we did not have a long experiment in doing exactly what you just recommended, Chris, but we had a short experiment. Trump did do most of those things, well, many of them anyway, with the 2017 tax cuts, which were in effect for 2018 and 2019. And then I think 2020 is a write-off because of the coronavirus pandemic. But we did not see a material increase in non-residential fixed investment, for example. That is, we were supposed to see a big increase in business spending in the United States, and it didn't happen. So are you saying we should just go back to the sort of low tax environment Trump had, or in other words, leave it in place? Or should we add something to that as a further inducement? Because Trump's approach doesn't seem to have changed very much.
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of forms to make America a more attractive place for business investment. One of them is the corporate tax. But, another is, labor union regulations and environmental regulations and our education policies and that sort of thing. But, corporate investment plans are very long term. I mean, when a Intel Corporation's thinking about building a new semiconductor factory, it's thinking long term. Or, when Tesla is thinking about where to build its new car factory, these are long term investments. I think the Trump corporate tax cut was a step forward. Wages did rise in the couple years that his corporate tax cut were in place. You're right, there wasn't a giant boost in infrastructure and investment, but it didn't fall also. I think it was pretty solid, and it did extend the U.S. economic expansion. I think we all agree that, corporate investment is very elastic. It's very mobile. You can put a car factory, a semiconductor factory anywhere in the world today. And, these companies, whether it's Intel or Apple, they decide at the margin, where the best place to locate their next factory is, and then they can ship the products anywhere in the world. So I think policymakers have to think how corporations think. We have to go to corporations and think, I don't want special favors for corporations. I just want low, equal rates for everyone to encourage them to do their long-term investment here in America.
Rick Newman.
So that's the economics of it. I just want to introduce a political element. So as a percentage of, whether you want to measure it as a percentage of GDP or as a just percentage of all federal revenue, corporate tax revenue is at record lows by both measures. And it almost is a non-functioning tax at this point. I mean, the amount of money that comes in from the corporate tax is relatively small relative to the federal budget. So that bothers people. I mean, that is a kind of a political problem, and it has contributed. It's one of the reasons the Trump tax cuts were unpopular on balance, because people think those tax cuts favored businesses and the wealthy too much, and they don't feel that businesses and the wealthy are doing their fair share. I'm not saying they are or they're not. I'm saying it actually is an effective political argument, which I think actually worked for Biden in 2020. Polls show majorities support higher taxes on businesses and higher taxes on the wealthy. So even if the economics might argue against that, you do have to address this political problem that it just doesn't look right.
So I do want to shift into the tax revenue standpoint. And Rick, please, or Chris, please speak specifically to the corporate income tax, and go ahead and make your point as well.
Yeah, Rick, you may look up on the Cato blog. I looked last week at the big industrial countries, and I looked over time since 1980 at what's happened to their corporate tax rate and then what's happened to the corporate tax revenues. Well, corporate tax rates have fallen around the world, as you may know. Interestingly, corporate tax revenues overall are actually up over the last few decades. We have lower rates and higher revenues. And so what has happened? Corporations are investing more, but also they're cheating less. They're avoiding taxes less. I think you're right. The public certainly doesn't like it when corporations get special treatment, when they're cheating, when they're moving profits offshore unfairly. But I think when you have a high rate, you induce the corporations to cheat, to move their profits offshore. You're right, corporate tax revenues were down in the last couple of years, but I think in the long run, if you have a low and competitive rate, you get more investment and you get less cheating, and I think those profits will come back, and then I think the government wins as well as businesses will win, and workers.
Rick Newman, you can respond to Chris Edwards, but Rick, I do want to ask you to also talk with what Chris was just saying in mind about Biden's proposal to raise the corporate tax rate.
Well, his proposal is to raise it from 21% where it is now to 28%. And there are a few other changes for different types of corporations. It was 35% before the 2017 tax cut law. So Biden wants to bring it halfway back to where it was. And he's probably not going to get 28% because of Democratic Senator Joe Manchin and a few other moderate Democrats who say that's just too high for businesses in their state. But I think he's going to get 25. I think the business tax rate is either going to go up to 25% or 26%. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, I follow the arguments on both sides. I mean, could it lead to more tax evasion or offshoring or whatever unintended consequences? Yes. But on the other hand, if you look at the stock market surely did fine when the tax rate was 35%. And investors know the corporate tax rate is going to go up. The investing professionals we have on Yahoo Finance all the time think the market understands this and it's close to priced in. So you're not seeing an adverse reaction in the stock market. So I think that tells you it would probably be okay to raise it up to 25%. I do think the corporate tax is just kind of broken. Honestly, it raises so little revenue on a relative basis. It seems like we're arguing about it more than we should. And maybe we shouldn't have a corporate tax at all. Maybe we should have a shareholder tax, or maybe it's time. I mean, eventually, I think we're probably going to end up with a value-added tax, which might replace everything we're talking about. But for now, we're probably just going to limp forward with a corporate tax that's a little bit higher starting in 2022 is my guess.
So I want to jump over to the capital gains tax now. And Chris Edwards, your thoughts on this, because President Biden has suggested a massive increase in the capital gains tax rate for those making above $1 million. What does his proposal entail and your sense for it, sir?
So the United States is nearly always, since we put an income tax a century ago, had lower rates or special treatment for capital gains because they are different from ordinary income. So Biden would roughly double the federal capital gains tax rate from around 20 to 40%. I don't think that's a good idea. I think a low capital gains tax rate is crucial for high-tech investment and investment in startups and new companies. If you think about Silicon Valley, the payoff to angel investors and rich people who invest in new startup businesses is they wait years for a payoff. These are very risky investments. A lot of them don't pay off. But the investments that do pay off, the investors get a big capital gain. And I think if you increase the capital gains tax rate, more American investors will put their money into safer investments like muni bonds and that sort of thing. So I'm really worried about the impact on Silicon Valley, and I'm curious what Rick's view is. I'm wondering why Silicon Valley sort of isn't up in arms about this. Investors, whether it's folks like Elon Musk and Bill Gates, they put a lot of their money into startup businesses, and this is why there's such dynamism in Silicon Valley. Aren't they concerned about rising capital gains? And if not, why not? I think it's a bit of a mystery here why Silicon Valley is not more concerned about this proposal.
Go ahead, Rick.
Well, I'm waiting for Mark Zuckerberg and Tim Cook to call me back on that. So when they do, I'll get back with you guys. So I accept the principle that if you tax something, you're going to get less of it. So if you tax investing, you might get less of it. But then if you just kind of just do a sort of ground truth, just ask yourself a ground truth. So if the return on investing goes down a little or even a lot, it doesn't mean you're going to stop investing. It means you will invest in something else, but only if you can get a higher rate of return. So I think a question we don't know the answer to is it possible that, we've just seen an utter boom in startups, and now we have SPACs and crypto startups and non-crypto, everything. We have an everything boom right now. So is it possible that returns are so high that you can actually lower those returns and they're still higher than historical averages? I don't know. But, I keep coming back to the alternative. Somebody needs to explain the alternative. So even before Biden's plans, we had very large budget deficits. We were spending way more than we were taking in revenue. And let's say you don't need to balance the budget every year, but I think deficits were too high on a chronic basis. So if you need money just to deal with your debts, and then you say we need to invest in the future, where is the money supposed to come from? it's, politically, it can only come from the people who have the money. I mean, there is just no political answer that gets you to, oh, we're going to tax the middle class more because we don't want to impinge on investment. That might be economically valid, but it is politically a non-starter. So where do you want to get the money?
Chris
I
Edwards,
just don't
go ahead
know
and
where
respond
else
to Rick. But first,
the other argument is just maybe
Sure.
we just don't invest in anything.
I want to ask Chris to respond to that, but also when it comes to incentives and when it comes to raising taxes on capital gains, and maybe it won't reduce investors' desire to invest, but what kind of incentives are there for possible changes in how they actually go ahead and invest, whether or not they take risks in new startups as much and what have you?
I mean, the first thing I would say, look, I would say let's not break what is broken. I mean, Silicon Valley has been a huge powerhouse for America for decades. In my view, partly based on our low capital gains tax rate, I would note that just about every major industrial country, just about every European country, they have a much lower capital gains tax rate than their ordinary tax rates for that reason that I was talking about, because they want their high-tech industries to succeed. So I'd say let's not risk it. The capital gains tax rate hardly raises any money for the federal government. That's, you're not going to raise much money, if any, by raising the rate anyway. Rick mentioned, so where are we going to, get the money for investing in these industries of the future? Well, that's up to the private sector. For most infrastructure in America is owned by state and local governments, and state and local governments have shown they're quite willing to raise money for their own highways, their own transit systems, and that's fine. They should do it. State and local governments should raise their own money for their own infrastructure. The federal government owns very little infrastructure, so infrastructure is mainly not a federal, responsibility or priority. So where should, I think I agree with you. I'm concerned about deficits. I think there's a lot of places we can cut, and a lot of these are outlined at the Cato Institute's website. I mentioned corporate welfare subsidies earlier. There's a lot of corporate welfare subsidies in the federal budget that we can cut, and I think we should cut. I think that'll help Americans understand that there's some fairness here, that we do eventually need to balance our budget. So let's cut the current subsidies we have for businesses, such as big corporate farms and that sort of thing. But I don't, we're not going to get the revenue you need to balance the budget from the capital gains tax. It hardly raises any money.
Well, and Rick Newman, to that point, I want to bring in, this is a very interesting op-ed yesterday in the Wall Street Journal. You may have seen it, by Lawrence Lindsay. He served as a Federal Reserve governor from 91 to 97. He wrote this on the revenue implications. What makes this unusual, that is Biden's proposal to potentially raise the capital gains rate on those making $1 million or more to 43.4% when you add the capital gains Medicare tax to it. What makes this unusual is that the 43.4% is well above the rate that would generate the most revenue for the government. Congress's Joint Committee on Taxation, which does the official scoring and is no den of supply-siders, puts the revenue maximizing rate at 28%. My work several decades ago puts it at about 10 points lower than that. That means President Biden is willing to accept lower revenues as the price of higher tax rates. The implications for his administration's economic thinking are mind-boggling. To Lindsay's point, Rick Newman, would raising the capital gains tax rate this much on higher income earners actually result in more revenue to the federal government?
I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. I did see that. So he said he cited research showing that the optimal rate would be around 28% rather than 40%. I think that's what we're going to get. I don't think we're going to get 40%. I think we're going to get something like 28% for the same reasons we talked about before with the corporate tax. One other thing I would add, I mean, I've seen all the fulminating about, oh my God, wealthy people in California, New York could end up paying, it could be upwards of 50% when you factor in, state and local capital gains taxes. I guess that's if you make a lot of capital gains and you don't have a lawyer and you don't have an accountant and you just fill out your form and you pay whatever the government owes. We just had the IRS commissioner significantly raise the estimate for the so-called tax gap, which is the amount of tax that people owe the government, but the IRS can never find and never collect, to $1 trillion a year. I mean, these tax proposals that Biden is talking about, I mean, these might raise 20 billion per year or 40 billion per year. And the IRS commissioner is saying there's $1 trillion per year that goes uncollected. So I have a hunch that some of that $1 trillion is those people who might be paying 50%. I don't think anybody would end up paying 50% because that's what great tax accountants and great tax lawyers do. So yes, 43.4 on paper, perhaps more than 50 all in on paper. I'd be astonished if anybody was so foolish to ever pay that.
Just a few minutes left with our guests, Rick Newman, senior columnist at Yahoo Finance, and Chris Edwards, director of tax policy studies at the Cato Institute. Chris, how about the potential for tax evasion and so forth, and what Rick Newman is talking about in terms of how the wealthiest would be responding to a potential tax increase in reality, potentially?
Well, the way I think about it is that tax rates and the tax base move in different directions. If you move tax rates too high, especially higher than other competing economies, then the tax base will shrink. There will be more cheating. There will be more avoidance and offshoring of revenues by corporations and wealthy people. So, I think the first thing is you need some reasonable rates so that people are induced to report all their income. And then close. I agree with Rick. We should close loopholes. I mean, one loophole that rich people have long had that I would be in favor of closing is that municipal bonds are completely tax-free. So one of the things that's going to happen if you raise the capital gains tax rate, a lot of wealthy people who now invest in startups, which I think is a good thing, they're going to move their money to tax-free municipal bonds. It's true the yield is lower, but at the margin, they're going to save a lot on taxes by investing in muni bonds. So that is one loophole that I would agree to close. So I think tax wonks on the left and the right. There are some reforms here that we could probably all agree with. Another one, the Republicans in the 27 tax bill put a cap on the state and local tax deduction. I think that was a good move. I think that was a loophole that should be closed, and I would repeal that altogether. The idea here is to have low and reasonable rates, in my view, and close the loopholes. And I think the government and its revenues will do just fine.
Overall, final question for you gentlemen on the substance here. Rick Newman first. When you look at Biden's plans, what do you think we will actually get in reality as far as an infrastructure package coupled with potential tax increases? And does it pass Congress perhaps through reconciliation?
I think the tax increases, I've said this before, are generally going to be about half of what Biden is asking for. And in terms of the infrastructure package, I mean, we're going to get a big infrastructure package. So Biden's asking for close to $2 trillion. Republicans came out with an alternative package that was between $600 and $800 billion, I think. So if let's say $600 billion, if that's the floor, we could get $1 trillion, and Democrats in the White House might sound disappointed because it's only half of what they want. That would still be a very large infrastructure package. I think the question, and we won't know the answer to this for years, but are they going to be spending it on the right things? Will it be investment that generates a return, or is it just going to be spending on programs? I do feel like we need some at some national level. We need to have a way to prioritize what we need to do for the next 20 years in these critical fields we've been talking about. And yes, infrastructure spending mostly comes from the private sector, but there is no single corporation, there is no single corporate entity of any kind who is concerned, number one, about what's in the national interest. Every company's job is what's in their own shareholders' interest. State and locals, they cannot plan at the national level. The only institution that can plan at the national level is the federal government, like it or not. So it does feel to me like we do need some federal guidance in terms of, getting ready for the next 25 years and make sure we do remain the leading economy.
Chris Edwards.
I'd question that idea that the federal government is able to plan, even if there were Washington is full of angels. I think that they would misdirect a lot of investment. To give you one good example, Rick, is Amtrak, which consistently runs large deficits. Amtrak, makes sense in the Northeast Corridor, Washington and Boston. It can earn profits there, but on many of its long-distance routes around the country, it loses massive amounts of money. Passenger rail doesn't make sense in a lot of those places, and yet because there's a lot of power from rural states in Congress, Amtrak directs its money to low-value investments where we don't need it. It's the same with airports. A lot of federal airport money goes to airports that don't need extra investment, and it starves investment money from the biggest airports that need the most investment. So I don't think federal government investment is very efficient. And a last word about the Biden plan is I don't think a very big plan is going to pass. I think a lot of these internal contradictions in the plan will become more evident in the months ahead. Like I said, this is a massive corporate welfare bill. A lot of Democrats say they're against corporate welfare. So I think the Democrats really need to figure out where they are on that. And a final point is a lot of the way Biden funds his plan is not green. The green way to fund infrastructure is through user charges. So, charge water users more money if you need money for investment. That reduces their water usage. That's green. But that's not what Biden does. Biden hands out a lot more subsidies from Washington, which is not a green way to fund infrastructure. So it's not going to help climate change on the funding side.
Gentlemen, I could keep going at this for ad nauseum. We could just keep talking because you guys are so insightful and thoughtful. Rick Newman, Yahoo Finance senior columnist. Chris Edwards, director of tax policy studies at the Cato Institute, also oversees downsizinggovernment.org. There we go. More applause from Mr. Matoush. Thank you both so much. What a great discussion, and I look forward to many more as these issues get sussed out. Thank you.
See you guys.
Thanks, Rick and Jimmy.
Once again, Rick Newman, senior columnist at Yahoo Finance, and Chris Edwards at the Cato Institute, director of tax policy studies. They're joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. My bottom line, you probably will not be surprised to know that I line up more with Chris Edwards on this because I think that, personally, I think we should eliminate the corporate tax and eliminate the capital gains tax and the dividends tax. I think that there are a lot of taxes on business that are much more harmful to the economy and to economic growth. But of course, I also live in the realm of reality and consider what is possible. And the biggest thing that's possible right now, I think, is to stop what's happening in terms of these potential tax increases and the massive infrastructure spending effort on the part of President Biden. I think we need to pull back the curtain for the American people on the real consequences of these things, in terms of what the revenue gained may actually be, in terms of how the economy will be affected, in terms of restricting business investment and so forth. Those are things we really need to be talking about. But I thought that was a fantastic discussion. These are two excellent individuals who really have some tremendous insights. So my thanks to Rick and Chris for joining us. We're going to take a quick break now here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. And when we return, Democrats are moving forward with their effort to make the 51st state of the United States of America. That would be Washington, D.C. They are also looking at making the Supreme Court consist of 13 justices, packing the court. When we return, I have a column coming out tomorrow for the Washington Examiner. I'm going to preview that and how both of these are attempted power grabs on the part of the Democrats. We'll talk about that coming up on Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. Don't go anywhere.
Who's there? What do you want?
Hello, Donald Trump. It's me, the Easter Bunny.
Have a seat, have a seat, have a seat so much. Do you remember, Easter Bunny, when I did you a huge favor by eliminating those horrible carrot tariffs?
Yeah,
Well, now guess what? You're going to do me a huge favor by doing your normal Easter Bunny thing, whatever that is. Running around the world, planting eggs in the ground, but America first, please.
Okay, a couple of things. First of all, I hop around the world. I don't run. And second of all, I don't plant the eggs. I just hide them.
How do they come to full maturity then?
Well, you hard boil them.
That seems a little cruel to me. I don't,
Well, I'll tell you what you can do. Why don't you just pardon them like you do the Thanksgiving turkeys?
It's a different thing.
The third thing. How am I going to get around the world, Mr. President? The travel ban's in effect. There's TSA to worry about. I mean, I got to get...
Consider it done. Consider it done. I'm going to use the War Appropriations Act to commandeer Santa's sleigh.
Good idea.
And there's nothing he can do about it.
Well, he might not.
Oh, you're worried about his elves.
The elves, yeah.
Believe me, if there is a stink, it's going to be boom, boom, out go their northern lights, believe me.
Oh, that seems kind of harsh.
Now, tell me something. When you hippity-hop out of your tomb...
that would be Jesus.
Every year. And you see your shadow?
That would be Puxatawny Phil, the gopher.
That means there's 6 more weeks of the quarantine, isn't that right?
That would be Dr. Fauci.
You know something very interesting? The Easter Bunny. Most bunnies leave only white eggs.
There's only me, sir.
And that's wrong. I'm the least egg-cis man you'll ever meet. This year we're gonna have all the colors of the eggs everywhere, every stripe. A panoply, a panorama, a rainbow. A rainbow of colors.
Yeah.
I want it to look like Walt Disney himself threw up.
Thanks for that visual. I think I can make that happen. Let me call my peeps. We'll get around the world before you know it, and Easter Sunday's going to be great again. Oh, and this year, Mr. President,
yes,
just as a favor, I promise not to smoke all the Easter grass.
That's a very good.
That's a little joke I got from Colorado.
I'm going to tweet that one, actually.
I'm out of here.
I'm tweeting it right now. Here I am. Oh, by the way, when you get to heaven, say hi to Half and the bunnies for me, please.
I really don't think that's the way it works, Don Trump, but I'll see what I can do.
And now, the further future adventures of Starship Winkler. In today's episode, the captain is making travel plans.
Sparks, open up a frequency to price expediosity line.
Yes, Captain.
Hello, and welcome to Price Expediosity Line. How can I help you?
Well, I'll need a room.
Are you traveling alone?
Yes.
Oh, that's a shame. Never found the right woman, huh?
Well, there was this... No, wait, just book me a bed.
King, queen, full, twin, Murphy, or bunk.
King. You never know.
Well, as long as you're convinced. All right, name your price.
Name my price?
That's how it works. Name your price.
$6?
$6 it is. Let's plug it in here. Bippity boppity boo. And sorry, you are outbid.
By how much?
Benny. Someone bid 6. Oh, 1.
Who?
Oh boy, I just booked a room for $6.01.
Well, will the captain ever make a good bed bid? Tune in next time when we hear...
Here's one for $602.
I'll take it.
$1,000.
No! Damn dramatic pauses.
On Starship Winkler.
Do you wear a toupee? Do you yell out, Spark? Do you put in pauses when you talk? Do you start real soft and then go real loud? Have you won 2 Emmys? Do you love a crowd?
Whatever makes you feel like a Shatner. Yeah, you got lots of macho and swagger. You had alien affairs. You sing bad but no one cares. You find low airline fares. If you like to work, got a handsome smirk. If you're Captain Kirk, whatever makes you feel like a...
Me. Phasers on. Stunning. Whatever makes you feel like a Shatner.
Welcome back, my friends. Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner on this Monday, April 26th. Great to be with you. And my thanks again to Rick Newman and Chris Edwards for such a vibrant conversation, very thought-provoking on what's happening in terms of the Biden economic plan. We will hear more about it, undoubtedly, by the president this Wednesday night when he gives his first national address to Congress and viewed by Americans all across the country on TV screens. And my thanks also, by the way, to Ruben Navarrette for joining us earlier. What a very interesting conversation with him as well. We will have these discussions up as standalone videos in the next day or so. Today, what I want to do to kind of wrap things up is talk about something very important in my view, which is what the Democrats are trying to do with making Washington, D.C., the 51st state of the Union, and also their goal, or at least the goal of many leaders in the Democratic Party right now, and I think long term it's the goal of most Democrats, is to pack the United States Supreme Court. That is to say, to make it go from 9 justices, where we've been at for 152 years, up to 13 justices, because they need to add 4 in order to get a liberal majority once again. Because now, at least theoretically, you have a conservative 6-3 majority. You would have it 7-6 if you packed the court. Tomorrow, that is Tuesday, I will have a column in the Washington Examiner. My tentative title, at least what I proposed, is Democrats are trying to lure Americans into their power grabs. You never know what they end up actually deciding to run with. But make no mistake, last week, the House passed on purely partisan lines a bill to make Washington, D.C. the 51st state. Now, this is something that Democrats have been angling for many years now, and they see an opportunity to really push for it, especially because not just that they have control of the House of Representatives, but because they feel the need to, in order to really get a permanent power structure for their side of the aisle. Because right now, think about it. 50-50 Senate split. The only reason that we have a Democrat majority in the U.S. Senate is because Kamala Harris is vice president and she's on Team Blue. If Donald Trump had won, then it would be a Republican Senate. Bottom line, it's a 50-50 split by the American people. A 50-50 split in the Senate. The House of Representatives is the closest that it has been in nearly 2 decades as far as a majority for either party. That is to say, it's the tightest that it has been. The Democrats don't have much of a majority, no matter how much Nancy Pelosi would like to think that she does. Given this dynamic, you have to think about the politics of the thing and whether or not it is woefully unwise for Democrats to march forward with this 51st state idea. Of course, they want to do this because that will give them an additional vote in the United States Senate, 2 votes in the Senate, and an additional voting member of the U.S. House of Representatives. But it's really the Senate that's key. And by the way, in the Senate, there are 44 Democrats who currently are on board as co-sponsors of their version of H.R. 51, which is the Democrats' bill, again, passed in the House along completely partisan lines. Think about this. There are a few reasons why Washington, D.C. should not become a state. Despite the argument that one may have, which is, well, there are hundreds of thousands of Americans in D.C. who are disenfranchised. Over 700,000 Americans in D.C. who don't get to vote for Congress, don't get to vote for the U.S. Senator. So why shouldn't they have a say? Why shouldn't they get to vote? Well, the answer is twofold. Washington, D.C. is not like other regions. Unlike Puerto Rico, unlike the Virgin Islands, unlike Guam, D.C. is literally a city. It's not a territory, and it's not like an ancient city-state. You think of Athens, for example. It's not like that. Historically, every state that has been admitted into the Union was either an original colony, it was a territory, or it was part of the state. West Virginia comes to mind. It's also the Federal District of Columbia, and for a reason. Federalist number 43 was written by James Madison, known as the father of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And he argued that the nation's capital needs to be independent of any state. That's because it cannot be reliant upon any state. It must not have any dependence upon a member state. Carving out the National Mall, and that's what they're proposing in this bill, to basically take the National Mall and make it a sort of Vatican within a new state, isn't going to cut it. It's not going to reach that objective. And it is woefully unconstitutional, especially when you think about the 23rd Amendment, which gives Washington, D.C. 3 electoral votes. You need to repeal that. It's in the legislation to repeal it, but it's going to take time, and it needs to be approved in order to make at least that aspect of this thing constitutional. Other scholars have written about the number of reasons. There are several for why D.C., it would be unconstitutional to make Washington, D.C. a state, but those are just a couple of key points. Now, if the goal was simply to enfranchise Americans, there are others who've made this point. I think it's a very important and valuable one. You should perhaps consider giving more parts of D.C. to Maryland. Alexandria and Arlington in Virginia were previously part of that District of Columbia, then they became part of Virginia and broke off. If you really want to just enfranchise more Americans, why not do that? Why not allow more of the city of D.C. to be included in Maryland? Well, it's because it's a power grab. That's their real objective. The goal of the Democrats here is not simply to enfranchise more Americans, to give them the vote for Congress. It is a power grab so they can have 2 additional senators and make for a greater majority in the United States Senate. But it doesn't stop there. Then we've got the court packing desire. Let's go to Jerry Nadler. He is the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, and he's one of the lead sponsors on this proposal to make Washington, to do the Supreme Court. That's what I'm looking for. When you got these power grabs and they're all up in the air and they're trying so many things, sometimes you mix them up. When it comes to packing the Supreme Court, this is what Jerry Nadler had to say in making the argument. You see, it's not really packing the court, it's unpacking the court.
Our predecessors made eminent sense when they pegged the size of the Supreme Court to the number of judicial circuits. As our country has grown, so too to the Supreme Court. 13 justices for 13 circuits is a logical progression, and that is another reason why I'm glad to join my colleagues in introducing, not a nice number, it's a proper number. It matches the number of circuits as it has historically, and it also will enable us to do justice and to rectify the great injustice that was done in packing the court. And some people will say we're packing the court. We're not packing it, we're unpacking it. Senator McConnell and the Republicans packed the court over the last couple of years, as Senator Markey outlined. So this is a reaction to that. It's a necessary step in the evolution of the court, and I'm proud to co-sponsor.
Jerry Nadler, we're unpacking the court. Folks, he just wants to bring balance to the Supreme Court so that peace and justice and harmony will reign supreme, and it will be magical. Just unpack the court, he says. Republicans are hypocritical because they're the ones who packed the Supreme Court. Well, okay, there are 2 things going on here. Number one, you have the idea of packing the Supreme Court and whether or not that's a good idea. And number 2, Republican opposition to packing the court. Is that simply rank hypocrisy? Let's address the first one first. President Biden, back in the 1980s, when he was a United States Senator, on multiple occasions over several years, liked to talk about and wax philosophical about the role of the judiciary and the need to not pack the court, why it was a bonehead idea. Take a listen. This is Biden in 1983, then Senator Biden.
President Roosevelt clearly had the right to send to the United States Senate and the United States Congress a proposal to pack the court. It was totally within his right to do that. He violated no law. He was legalistically absolutely correct, but it was a bonehead idea. It was a terrible, terrible mistake to make, and it put in question, for an entire decade, the independence of the most significant body, including the Congress in my view, the most significant body in this country, the Supreme Court of the United States of America. The President had the right to do that. He was totally within his power, and his objective was seen clearly.
It was a bonehead idea, said then Senator Biden. Now that he's president, he hasn't come out in support of packing the court, but he has created a commission to examine the idea of judicial reforms, to include the possibility of court packing. Now, in another address in 1987, Biden highlighted what the Democrats in the Senate Judiciary Committee had concluded about FDR's court packing idea 50 years before his speech. And in that, he talked about how the commission strongly opposed the idea of packing the U.S. Supreme Court. In fact, the Senate Democrats on this Judiciary Committee called it an invasion of judicial power such has never been before been attempted in this country. Again, an invasion of judicial power such as has never before been attempted in this country. That's what the Democrats said in rebuking then Democrat President FDR for court packing. It is a bad idea because it delegitimizes the Supreme Court and causes Americans to distrust the court. Now, you see on the screen, Neil Gorsuch. He was Trump's first appointee. He had that opportunity as president of the United States at the time in 2017 because Republicans held up Merrick Garland's nomination. He was then able to nominate and have confirmed by the Senate Justice Brett Kavanaugh and Justice Amy Coney Barrett. You see her on the screen. He had that prerogative to make those appointments. In fact, he ran. In 2016, he ran on a ticket to appoint constitutionalist justices on the court to the point where during the primary, towards the tail end of the primary, when he realized he needed to shore up the conservative base of the Republican Party, he presented his first list, I think, of 11 potential justices to the bench. I think a couple of them ended up being on the Supreme Court as he continually added to that list over time. He didn't need to do it. He felt he wanted to do it because it would be a good way to shore up conservative support. It was a key part of his 2016 agenda. He was elected president. He had that opportunity. The Constitution gives the president the prerogative to make judicial appointments, including to the Supreme Court. It's not packing if it is something that is common practice authorized in the Constitution and the right of the president to do so. And when it comes to the United States Senate, U.S. senators have the opportunity to make a determination when a president nominates as to whether to confirm that individual, or even if they're in the waning days of a lame duck administration, to decide whether or not to move forward with the confirmation process. In 2016, Republicans decided not to do that with Merrick Garland. That was their prerogative. It is not packing the court if you're just following what you're able to do, what's permitted, what's been done in the past, and the right that you have in, say, the Senate majority, especially when it was a sacrosanct campaign promise. Last I checked, Joe Biden didn't give a definitive answer on whether or not he wanted to pack the court. Same thing here in Colorado, where I am, with Senator John Hickenlooper, who doggedly refused to give an answer, and he still does to this day, as to whether or not he supports packing the court. Now, with this in mind, recognizing that there's no hypocrisy here, we have to really point out that it's been 152 years since the U.S. Supreme Court was made 9 members. 152 years. As I write in my forthcoming column for the Examiner tomorrow, simply put, no justice will last 152 years on the bench in the same way the court size has remained constant. There is no comparison whatsoever between court packing and what Trump accomplished. Just ask 2 liberal court packing opponents, the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and sitting Justice Stephen Breyer. In truth, this is the fact of the matter. The reason that the Democrats are talking about court packing that so many of them are interested in packing the court, making it go from 9 justices to 13, presumably with Democrats, is again a power grab, the same kind of power grab that justifies their goal of making D.C. the 51st state and giving them 2 additional Senate seats. They would have a 7-6 majority. Why would Democrats want such a large number on the bench? It comes right from FDR's playbook in the 1930s. You see, FDR was very clear about it. Roosevelt was clear in his intent. He wanted a more compliant Supreme Court. He wanted to pack the court because they would otherwise continue to be potentially an impediment to his agenda. And the Democrats are anticipating that very same thing now when it comes to the Supreme Court. Like Jerry Nadler. Jerry Nadler's objective is to amplify a liberal presence on the court so that they have the majority. The Democrats today share the same motivation as FDR. The only difference is FDR was transparent about his reasoning. Here's the fact of the matter, the bottom line. Without question, congressional Democrats' brazenly unconstitutional and utterly antithetical push for D.C. statehood, coupled with their anti-historical and anti-democratic desire to pack the Supreme Court, is a clear power grab. It is a clear indication of their desire to expand their power permanently. Because think about it, 152 years with 9 justices, go to 13, maybe the same thing then. There's so much more that could be said about this. But that's the bottom line. There are real, substantive, significant reasons to oppose both initiatives. And we need to make sure that both are stopped. Because the Republic truly depends upon it. And just a quick little anecdote, the last time we added states was 1959. Alaska and Hawaii. And the perception was that Hawaii would be a Republican state and Alaska would be a Democrat state, and it was a compromise with a Republican president and a Democrat Congress. That spirit of partisan compromise to add states to the Union doesn't seem to be there anymore, even with a 50-50 split in the Senate and a nearly 50-50 split in the U.S. House of Representatives. Keep in mind, the Democrats' majority in the House is very slim. We'll keep tabs on this very important issue as things progress. Thank you so much for joining us. That is it for us today here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Once again, my thanks to Ruben Navarrette, Rick Newman, and Chris Edwards for joining us here on the program. To Nathan Matouche, producer extraordinaire. Let's get some applause in here, Nathan, as we wrap up. Applause for everybody, and to you, a special round of applause to you for liking, subscribing, sharing our content. We'll be back next week with Jack Phillips of Masterpiece Cake Shop and Judge Ken Starr, author of the new book, Religious Liberty in Crisis. In the meantime, have a great day, and as always, God bless America.
Talking politics, great for generations. Oh, what a mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of no sense. Yeah.